The first cemetery started around the top of the hill right here, where Ebenezer Methodist Church had their first building. That was in about 1838. They built the first church here, and they probably started burying fairly soon to that. However, a lot of these pioneer cemeteries, and they would have been pioneers in the 1830s in this part of Georgia, would use wooden monuments. So,
see that you come from the house. You probably know that many of the finest estates in this area were burned during the Civil War. And that was when General Sherman's troops came rolling through Georgia. And you probably wonder how this distinguished home escaped the wrath of the Union Army. Well, there's a very good reason. It was saved because of love. It all started back in 1836 when my brother Marcellus was at the military academy at West Point, and he invited me up to New York to attend one of the military balls. There I first was introduced to his roommate, William T. Sherman. Mr. Sherman was very attentive and persistent, even though I told him that his eyes were cold and cruel, and I knew that he would vanquish any enemy. I said I pitied anyone who would become his foe. And he said to me, even if you were my enemy, I would ever shield and protect you. It was a gallant statement, but I gave him no encouragement. You see, I was from a very wealthy family, and my father would have never considered him to be an acceptable suitor. Sometime later, I was off in South Carolina visiting some family friends when I met a much more acceptable candidate, Mr. Charles Shellman. Charles was wealthy, very wealthy. His fruit orchards were famous for producing the finest peaches, pears, and plums. And so, before long, we were married, and we returned to Cartersville, Georgia, Cass County, where he built me his beautiful home. Before long, the war between the states broke out, and Charles was serving as an officer in the Confederate Army. And so I fled to take refuge with some of my family friends, not knowing what would happen to our beautiful estate. I left behind our very trusted groundskeeper, Joe. I knew that he could not protect our home, but at least he could tell us what had happened. Before long, the Union Army came right up to the gates of the Etowah Heights, and Joe bravely met them at the gate. But the soldiers pushed through, and they began taking our possessions out of the house, and they were preparing to burn it down. And Joe said, I am so glad that Mrs. C is not here to see this. Well, that caught the attention of General Sherman. He said, could you possibly be referring to Mrs. C. Stovall? And Joe said that yes, he was referring to me, but that I was now Mrs. Charles Shellman. Well, immediately, General Sherman called a halt to his troops' activities. He made them take everything back in the house, and he posted a guard at the gate so that no one else would molest it. He called for his clerk, and he composed a note which he gave to Joe. And he told him to give it to me should I return. Well, I did return to our estate, and I was astonished to find it still standing. Joe came and told me everything that had happened, and he gave me the note. And I have it right here. Mrs. Shellman, you once told me that you pitied anyone who would be my enemy. Do you recall my reply? I said that I would ever shield and protect you. That I have done. Forgive all else. I am only a soldier. William T. Sherman. And that is how my home was saved. It was built from the love of a husband, but it was saved from the love of a long-forgotten admirer. And for that, I am so grateful. Thank you for coming today.
Isn't it funny how life moves so slow sometimes? I always thought it was a southern thing, something you really only understood if you were from a small town just like this one. I was your typical southern woman from a good family of more memorable names than my own. My father was Judge George Aubrey. My grandfather was Charles Smith, though you probably know him as Bill R. He was a politician, a humorist, and a columnist for the Atlanta Constitution. But me, I was just Catherine Aubrey Munford, a proud Georgian, a mother, and just an ordinary person. My boys and I loved those slow southern days. We would ride along the countryside in the big touring car my husband bought us. We would go see friends and talk about Cartersville's social gatherings. We would go to bridge games and dinner parties, Sunday school, and church meetings at Sam Jones Methodist Church. Those slow drives gave me and my boys more than just something to do. It helped build our lives. We got to explore parts of Cartersville that some folks never got to see. It is a bit startling to know that one of those drives is what took me from the earth. We were driving one day, as we so often were. We crossed over the train tracks downtown. The train tracks that many of you probably travel every day. We didn't see the train until it was too late. It's funny how life moves so slow sometimes. Other times it just moves too fast. And then one day it's gone, just like that.
I didn't notice you there. I'm sorry, I don't mean to seem rude. I just adore reading, and sometimes I get a little lost in my books. I'm Mary Parks Kennedy, and I wasn't very old when I ended up here. I was just 19, with my greatest accomplishment thus far being labeled head of my class in Cartersville High School, class of 1928. Mostly I was a normal teenager. I spent time with my sisters, and I studied, and I loved to read. On Christmas Eve, 1928, I visited the fireworks shop on the corner of Main and Wall Street. It's where Antonio's is today. And my friends and I were all excited to celebrate the holiday. We were all looking at the many options when another customer walked in. This man truthfully smelled a lot like alcohol, but he was just there to buy a Roman candle, so we didn't think much of it. Then, suddenly, he decided to light the Roman candle, and one of the candle's bulbs hit the other merchandise, and, well, the explosion's all I remember. All five of us, Mary Bell Dodd, Hugh Paget, William and Francis Shaw, and me, were all victims that night. It's hard to consider your own adventure at the end, but I try not to complain too much. After all, it's peaceful here. And I have my book, which, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to get back to. I just got to a really exciting part, and I just have to see what happens next.
Hi there, I'm Steph Phelps. As a little girl growing up in Decatur, Georgia, I loved to sit and watch the people as they passed by my home and visited the tavern next door. These travelers inspired me with their stories, and the more famous of them really sparked an ambition within me to achieve great things. I arrived here in Bartow County as an 18-year-old bride, an arrival that was quickly followed by the birth of 3 of my children and the start of the Civil War. My husband and I cared for wounded soldiers here in Cartersville before we were forced to flee to Macon to avoid Sherman and the incoming Union Army. When we eventually were able to return to Cartersville, my husband started a new journey. He was elected to Congress, and I was exposed to the world of politics. I became my husband's campaign manager, private secretary, and general counselor, all jobs that people thought were rather unbecoming of a lady at the time. I also began writing around this time and using my words to influence public opinion. I was granted a regular column in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution where I was able to promote educational opportunities for women and support women's suffrage. I also wrote to encourage prison reform, specifically the end of the convict police system. This was a brutal method of using prisoners to complete dangerous and difficult tasks for the benefit of the state. In October of 1922, a dear friend of mine, Tom Watson, passed away unexpectedly. In the wake of his passing, I found myself in an unusual position. I was granted the symbolic gesture of being sworn in as a senator for a day before Tom Watson's replacement could take over. As a result, I became the first female senator in United States history. In my first and only day on the job, I shared my vision for the future. Let me say this, Mr. President, that when the women of this country come in here to speak with you, though there may be very few in the next few years, I pledge that you will get ability. You will get integrity of purpose, you will get exalted patriotism, and you will get unstinted ability. Like all lives, mine is complicated. It's full of good and bad. But it does make me proud to know that many women have followed in my footsteps and served their communities and their country.
Hello. Y'all caught me working on some stuff. Hi everyone. My name is Laura McElwin Jones, and my husband is Reverend Sam Jones. He's pretty famous, so y'all might have heard of him. Now, he traveled around everywhere telling people that they needed to be kind to each other. A good message, I think. About as famous, at least locally, as my husband is the home that we lived in, which is called Roselawn. Now, if you've seen it, it looks a little bit different today than when we bought the property in the 1880s. And even more different than the 1860s when it was built by Mr. Gilreth. Now, in the 1880s, we bought it, and we decided for our growing family it needed some adjustments. So we built on 2 wings, one on either side of the building, and that suited us just fine until the 1890s when I gave birth to our 7th child. Now, we're not complaining people by any stretch of the means, but our congregation did know where we lived and how many people lived there, and they could just imagine how far a pastor's salary had to go to feed all those people. And by golly, do they eat. Bless them. So the church gave us a gift of money to purchase a larger home to fit all our family in. And we thought it was so kind, but I just couldn't leave. So I told my husband that Roselawn was where I belonged, and he agreed the Joneses were going to stay. So now it was up to the 2 of us to figure out, well, how on earth do we make this work for all these people? And we came to a pretty unique conclusion. We were going to raise up the already 2 existing floors and build underneath. Now, every time I tell this, people look like I've grown a second head, but it worked for us. So, I mean, you can imagine we've already extended out. The only place we have really to go is up. So we jacked up the already 2 existing floors, and we built what is the current first floor then. And it worked just fine for us. We lived there the rest of our married lives, raised all of our children, and had many a friend come over for a home-cooked meal. The best part about being a reverend's wife is that you get to connect with everybody. So thank y'all all for coming. Now I'm going to get back to this. And y'all have a great day.
Absolutely. So there's carved fabric draped here. Now there's a special kind of fabric that was important to funerals. And we still use the word even though we don't use it. This is the pall. So the pall was the fabric or flowers that you would drape over a coffin. So if you were going to be a pall bearer, you were the person that was going to carry in and out the pall. Now, in the late 1800s, this became a very popular symbol to put on tombstones. This carved fabric is draped all the way over the headstone. That means that the pall was drawn over someone's life. They had a great life. They lived a good life. And you know that because the book, the Bible, the book of life, is open on top of it. Now, sometimes you will see this carved stone, this pall, just draped over the right side of a headstone. And sometimes it'll be draped over the book as well. And that means that someone's life was drawn away too soon. Their pall came too soon. They were cut off in the prime of their life. So the good reverend here, his pall is all the way over his stone. That means that his family thought he had a wonderful life when he passed. So there's a lot of information that the art on the tombstones can give us.
Where does Dillard come from?
Bartow County on September 5th, 1875. She was the daughter of Lewis Sims Mumford and Emma Militia Jones. Mr. Lewis Mumford was a board member of the mining company in Georgia, Bartow County, and was committee chairman on the building committee for the Sam Jones Memorial Methodist Church in Cartersville. Miss Mumford was raised in Cartersville as part of a notable family and was recognized for her charming manner and her talents. She was involved with many local clubs and organizations. Most notably, she was the secretary of the Women's Press Club of Georgia and was known for her writings for the press. In the Covenant American newspaper on October the 1st, 1898, Mr. and Mrs. Lewis Sims Mumford announced the upcoming nuptials for their daughter, Lewis Dillard Mumford, to the notable Chattanooga City Attorney, Mr. Oscar T. Peoples. It was reported Mr. Peoples was a man of solid makeup and through strong intelligence won his way to prominence in the community of Chattanooga. The wedding was held December 1st at high noon at the home of the bride, also known as the Oaks. Those who witnessed the nuptials came from places like Winchester, Tennessee, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Rome, Georgia, Summerville, Georgia, Atlanta, Georgia, along with dignitaries from the Cartersville area, according to the Covenant American. Having relocated to Chattanooga after the wedding, Mrs. Peoples continued her club work. In 1906, she was chosen to represent the Tennessee Press and Authors Club at the National Press League in Denver, Colorado, thus demonstrating her remarkable capable manners and her ability and her brilliant mind, according to the Atlanta Georgian, August the 11th, 1906. After returning to Cartersville between 1907 and 1909, she sent invitations to 24 women and her mother to meet and discuss perfecting the plans for a local chapter of Daughters of the American Revolution. In February and March, they met and created those plans, formulated those plans. In April of 1909, the chapter was recognized by the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution and received its charter, with Mrs. Peoples as its first regent. They met at the home of Mrs. Mumford, her mother, the Oaks, with the other 24 charter members of the organization. The membership at that time was comprised of members from 3 states, Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee, and 5 cities. Only a month later, the Etowah chapter of DAR awarded its first prize. This is one of the things that the chapter does. It awards scholarships to students in the high school in the area. The $5 prize was given to a local high school student and for an essay that he had written that was deemed the best essay. The title of the essay was Causes Which Led to the American Revolution. The first committee formed in the chapter was tasked to investigate the Revolutionary War graves in Bartow County. The second committee was formed to investigate the early history of Bartow County. Both of these committees and all of the other committees that are in the chapter are in keeping with the objectives of the National Society of Daughters of the American Revolution: to preserve history, to support education, to uphold the Constitution, and respect the flag. Mrs. Peoples served as regent for the Etowah chapter from 1909 to 1912, and again from 1928 to 1930. The chapter was named by Mrs. Peoples the Etowah chapter after the river and the Etowah Mountains. Etowah meaning gathering of the wise men of the tribe. She chose this since at the time there was no Revolutionary War spots to be commemorated in Bartow County. The chapter continues today in Mrs. Peoples' legacy. Over the years, there have been 44 regents, several of which have served multiple terms. In April of 2019, the chapter celebrated its 110th anniversary. Currently, there are 33 members of the Etowah chapter. There are over 8,000 DAR members in the state of Georgia and over 185,000 active DAR members, both nationally and internationally. There are 111 additional chapters in Georgia. The chapter continues today, and it continues to carry on the legacy of Mrs. Peoples, who died in 1947. We support a variety of different causes. We support education. We support the foundation at Berry College. We're also involved with a place called Meadow Gardens. This is a house that was built in the 1790s and was the home of George Walton, who was one of the youngest signers of the Declaration of Independence. That house is now currently undergoing renovation, which is being supported by the DAR.